Welcome back to the channel. It's fairly often that someone will ask me, what car should I buy? How much should I spend? But more predominantly comes about, this is my budget and what's the best car for my money. Now, as luck would have it, on one of the recent videos, one of our good subscribers, Lambo Man, put in detail in his comment that he was actually thinking about a 355. And it sparked the thought in my mind, I hadn't driven my 355 in quite some time, so I took the time to move all the cars out of the way, and here we are in the 355. And he had a long list of cars. It's kind of unusual because, you know, there are a lot of cars available, but two cars that I own are kind of in the same price range, the 355 and the 996 Turbo. Now, as far as performance, the 355 makes a whole lot of noise, but it's just not as powerful. There's a valid argument on both sides. In stock trim, you know, the 355 was a good performer, but still, the 996 Turbo at 415 horsepower had the edge. Then you add in the modifications and everything I've done to this, or everything you could do potentially, and it kind of widens the gap a lot. So you go to the performance, and then also you add into that the 996 Turbo is all-wheel drive. Now, you know, that's personal preference. It depends. Honestly, for me, when I want to have fun, I'd prefer rear-wheel drive. But, you know, if it's all-out performance, I always feel all-wheel drive is the way to go. Some of you will probably argue with that, and that's great. Love to hear about it. But that's specifically for me and how I drive. Taking everything into account as far as how fast they are, how they handle, and how fast they could track, per se, zip through the back roads, it's pretty tough to beat the 996 Turbo. It honestly is. That segues into one of the important aspects of which car is more fun to drive. Now, ordinarily, rear-wheel drive for me is the way to go. I like to be able to pitch out the rear and everything, but the crazy part is that the 996 Turbo just gets it done, but it gets it done in an unusual way. It's just kind of like ridiculousness. When it comes on boosts, especially with the upgrades, and even with the all-wheel drive, it almost kind of fights itself, which makes it a very fun ride altogether. You know, you just don't get all that sliding out that you would get in the 355. It's just a different experience, and that is totally subjective. I mean, I'm just telling you for me, but I'm sure there are a lot of people that would prefer the 355, including JC. I do know that for a fact, because as all of you know, Porsches and Ferraris have very different personalities, and it just so happens that he just loves that Ferrari personality. And for me, I don't know, I'm not biased to one brand or another. I just like what I like, and it just so happens that this car's pretty funny to me when it comes on boosts and it goes, and it just feels like it. I mean, even though I have cars that have more horsepower, as a lot of you know, when forced induction comes on, especially turbochargers, if there is just the right amount of lag, it actually makes for a very pleasant experience. I know everyone complains about turbo lag, but, you know, in this car, it just works and feels right. One of the most important aspects to all of us is handling. And taking these cars basically how they came to me, there's no question that the 355 handles better. I know I'm probably going to hear a whole bunch of comments that vary from that, but to me, as far as handling, the car is much more balanced. And I mean, playing into that factor, the 355 just kind of seems to have the right amount of power for how much the chassis can hold. For me, there's no question the 355 would have the advantage, but since we're talking about it, and just a quick note on the transmission, I'm not going to really say either way. The transmission topic between F1 and manual is beat to death, And that's really all up to you. I'll say that if you're going to get a 355 and you can handle the extra expense, it's definitely worth going the manual if you're not going to be doing your own work, because for sure, the F1 is more problematic. I'm not going to argue with that. But the one thing about the F1 that's pretty crazy is that when you go and you lay it down and you hit it like that, it's just very hard and very fast. Both cars, to me, working on them, doing the regular service, maintenance, pretty similar. Not bad at all. But there's one major difference between these two vehicles that separate them, and that is the 996 Turbo timing chain and the 355 timing belt. Now, for those of you that don't know, the 355 timing belt change is an engine out service. So when I first got mine, I was so excited that the sponsors were going to get me one. I didn't do enough research. And then lo and behold, I found out down the road about 3 years later when I was advised that I need to change the timing belt. Now, it depends who you talk to. You know, you talk to some dealers will say 3 years, some say 5. I want to say that the first round I probably waited like 6 or 7 years. And the interesting thing is that I had my good friend JC send the belts out to be tested at the lab, and the lab results came back that they would have easily ran for 10 years. So that expense, you know, isn't earth-shattering. And the other side of it is, for a lot of you do-it-yourselfers, you could possibly take it on yourself. I thought about it a lot, and I've never done it myself. And for me, the main problem is this. To send it down to fast cars, I think cost me around $7,000. If I take it on myself, my time would probably be much more, but the bigger issue would be, what if I accidentally make a mistake? And oftentimes, as many as you know, it happens on the first time when you're learning. Well, the problem is if you make a mistake, then the cost is exponential versus what you save doing it yourself. So I'm not so sure if that's a great idea. So in my specific case, I've always sent it out. As far as reliability, both have been solid. I haven't really had any issues with either car, but because of that timing belt being a bit of an issue, for me, I would say that in the serviceability department, encapsulating the timing belt, the 996 Turbo would have the advantage. When I first got the 355, you know, it was the current model and everyone was very excited. The interesting thing was, when a lot of them looked at the car, there was kind of a trend. A lot of people were disappointed in the interior. And, you know, for me, it's just kind of a different thing. It doesn't look as contemporary as the other cars, but I do like it. I did modify it by putting in a lot of carbon Kevlar, which actually helped it a lot. Carbon fiber door panels, courtesy of Group M. All in all, though, I'd have to say, when I look at the interior of the 996 Turbo, the interesting thing is, as we have newer Porsche models, it kind of feels the same, which is kind of a nice thing about it. You almost feel like you're home. You get in one, you get in another one. There's so many similarities. Even in the Cayenne turbos, it all kind of feels the same. But for me, the layout and the ergonomics, I kind of prefer the 996 Turbo. Everything's within reach of the driver, you know, and they have a lot of creature comforts that you wouldn't per se have in the 355. Not to say that you couldn't add them, but just taking it at face value. For me, when I look at both of them, I'm going to go with the 996 Turbo. And then we move on to certain things that a lot of people, even me, find important to some degree, like the stereo. Well, to me, both stereos aren't super great. I mean, most of you that have these type of cars know that manufacturers focus mostly on the engine, the performance, the drivetrain. Oftentimes, the stereo is an afterthought. Even in this Ferrari, it's some sort of Sony with a CD changer, but the quality isn't incredibly good, and most of you that are autophiles are going to change your stereos anyway. Even in the 996 Turbo, both cars kind of sound the same to me. So for me, I call it a push. So much personal preference there. I mean, I don't know. You know, it's difficult for me to say, but that's how I would call it. When we talk about my 996 Turbo, I modified it in a multitude of ways. You know, starting with the exterior, I changed everything to the TechArt Type 2 GTS body kit that encapsulated the front bumper, the side skirts, you know, different air intake ducts for the intercooler, rear bumper. I also changed the TechArt wing. Now, I did stay with the smaller wing that I could still use the active aerodynamics. As all of you know, I'm a fan of active aerodynamics. Now, would I have saved weight with the fixed wing? Could I have more downforce? For sure. But I feel the trade-off is worth it. There are body kits available for the 355. I haven't really seen any that I like myself. You're welcome to comment, but I'm going to go ahead and keep it in that classic look. But there's definitely a lot of different kits available for the 996 Turbo. So it kind of depends on your taste, but I'm sure you can find something that'll fall on that you like. As far as upgrading performance, well, God, the sky's the limit, like in the 996 Turbo. I mean, just in mine, I was able to upgrade the turbos, and there are tons of different turbo combinations, standalone engine management, or you can have somebody reprogram your DME. It's just endless. Intercoolers, you know, you can use the GT2 intercoolers, or you can go crazy. Even if you come around the corners and you nail it in all-wheel drive, well, it still kind of gets away on you a little bit. But luckily, the PSM really keeps it in check. The exterior of any vehicle is the most important aspect to me because it's all about the look, as many of you know. So for me, it's an easy answer. Who has the advantage? Well, who has the advantage in this case would be the 355, hands down. I mean, I've done modifications with my TechArt kit for the 996 Turbo. I like the way it looks, but the classic Ferrari look of the 355, in fact, I actually like the way it looks better than my 430. This car, as many of you know, was designed to be as good looking as possible, you know, before wind tunneling and coefficient of drag started molding all the cars. That's what I really like about this car. And when you take everything into account, to me, the 355 has the advantage on the exterior, hands down. Exhaust tone. Well, many of you probably know where I'm going to go on this, but the 355 was actually fairly quiet when I got it. It's very unique, flat plane crank. It's the only car I have with 5 valves per cylinder, 3 intakes, 2 exhausts. Now, the key is that produces a very different type of sound. Then you couple in this car with the tubey, and this is the type of sound you get. When I compare the two exhaust tones, in fact, the 355 is better sounding than any of my cars. I'll flat out say that. Denison from Australia will often comment that this is the best sounding car in my collection. I'm not going to argue with that at all, it's true. But I will say, to get that tone, what I had to do was put the tubey exhaust on it. So those of you that do end up getting a 355, I highly recommend getting a tubey exhaust. It just sounds phenomenal. Putting all that together, the exhaust tone of the 355, hands down, is at the advantage. Something that all of you will hear me talk about a lot is the driving experience. Super important to me, because when the cars get older and nobody's talking about horsepower, torque, quarter mile, well, then it kind of comes down to how much fun it is. I mean, and what good is it to drive one of these if they're not a whole lot of fun? Talking about value, what you're going to get. So let's just say hypothetically that the cars would cost the same amount. Now obviously there are different versions that you can get and all sorts of different price ranges out there, and as all of you know, the prices of used exotic cars are up quite high right now. But let's say, for argument's sake, that it's equal. Well, you know, you have more costs in the 355, but I don't know, typically if you can afford the car, the maintenance isn't going to kill you. That's the bottom line. And most people are pretty careful, so I don't know if you can really put that whole daily driver into the equation. But if you did, there is something to be said about miles, okay? And I'll tell you something about the 355, or any Ferrari for that matter. When I took the 355 into the auto gallery for the first time for the timing belt, my friend at the time, Gary Kawakami, was a service manager. And he was very nice, and he told me, he said, Adam, he said, your car is super clean for the high miles it has. I'll mention that it had 5,000 miles. Now, right now, I have 9,600 miles as we speak. I don't know, so in, you know, conversion to a regular car, that would be quite high. So you can imagine, if you tried to daily drive this, your depreciation would be gnarly. And then on top of that, these cars have a weird thing. For some reason, they just require tons of maintenance. I will almost say they literally start falling apart. And there's nobody that can explain that better than my good friend JC.
You know, like I said, buying a Ferrari and maintaining a Ferrari are two different things.
On his 550. Now, JC is a true purist enthusiast, and I love that about him. He enjoys the car much more than I do. My cars, I run them, I put them away, I do love them, but I just can't handle dealing with parking lots and the stress of all the things that come along with driving them all the time, not to mention all the maintenance costs. But he does, and I think last time we talked, he has somewhere around 40 or 50,000 miles on his 550, but he's constantly repairing it non-stop. Is it worth it for the fun that he has in the car? Well, I think so, yes, but that's something you want to consider. I mean, the type of repairs that he sees, and the list is very long, you won't see in a Porsche anywhere near that type of mileage. Now, you'll get some eventually. I mean, all the European cars, to me, once they hit 100,000 miles, you start seeing all sorts of interesting things that need to be fixed. But as far as Ferrari and Lambo, they seem to kind of move forward on that scale. So anyways, that's something to think about. Well, other than that, there you have it. The results of which car to get, in my opinion. Now, the million-dollar question is, would I do this again if I went back in time and I had the choice? Would I get the 355 first or the 996 Turbo? Well, the answer is simple for me. I'd still get the 355 first, because there's just something about Ferraris. And those of you that own them, have owned them, and drive them, you know what I'm talking about. For me now, it's time to head out and enjoy the rest of my weekend in the 355. And I hope all of you have a great weekend as well. See you next time.